Hey everyone, Tony D and Little Joan here. This is a hot take, and we are going to look at two New York Times articles and kind of compare them a little bit. Now they're written by different reporters, and they're about two different subjects, but they are subjects that are kind of similar in nature. And I think what you're going to see here is that the New York Times isn't very objective. If in case you haven't thought of that, I'm just checking my thing here. All right, so today's or the other day, this article came out examining Tara Reade's sexual assault allegation against Joe Biden. Now, I'm not a huge fan of people coming out of the woodwork during a political campaign to make these sorts of claims. And you can see a lot of hypocrisy from people on the left side of politics because when this happened, back here on the right, where you have Christine Blasey-Ford came out, most of the Me Too people were shouting, believe women, as if we shouldn't have an investigation, that we should just take her as her word. I think there's this trope that, Republicans are all bad and Democrats are all good. And, when a Republican, when a Democrat does something bad, well, it's a mistake or it's a misunderstanding. But when a Republican does something bad, he's evil, and that proves he's evil, and we should all be gung ho to destroy their lives. And the bias in the New York Times is pretty evident if you compare these two articles. Now, they're written by groups of different reporters. Two reporters wrote the Tara Reade story, and five reporters wrote the Christine Blasey Ford story. And they're from two different times, and they're two different situations. But the presentation is pretty stark. They're not, in my view, they're not really being reporters. They're gearing up, and you could see their bias within these two articles. So if you look at the Tara Reade story, here's the headline: Examining Tara Reade's sexual assault allegation against Joe Biden. It's very clinical. It's kind of distant. But then you look at the Christine Blasey Ford one, and it's like, for Christine Blasey Ford, a drastic turn from a quiet life in academia. That's kind of, almost like a Hallmark movie of the week kind of pitch, right? It's like, you got one woman here, well, let's see if she has anything to say. And then you have the other woman, it's like, oh my God, her whole life's been ruined. Like, already in the headline, it's like she's being portrayed as a victim when we don't have any proof that she's a victim necessarily. There's an allegation, just like there's an allegation against Biden. And again, I'm not a fan of, I think both these allegations are political. They're driven by politics, not really driven by, hey, I've been necessarily wronged here and I desperately need closure after all this time. I think it's more driven by, like, hey, this person, I don't like them politically and I'm going to destroy them. And now that's not to say even if that's true, that didn't happen, but it puts it in a different light, I think. And you got a little sub headline under Tara Reade's story: Miss Reade, a former Senate aide, has accused Mr. Biden of assaulting her in 1993 and says she told others about it. See, already it's like, well, she says that. A Biden spokesman said that the allegation is false, and former Senate office staff members do not recall such an incident, and they refer to it as an incident. They're already in this little minor headline already saying, well, this doesn't sound very likely. And if you look at it's not really a sub headline, but it's the caption under Christine Blasey Ford, and you've got this nice smiling picture of her. It says Christine Blasey Ford was reluctant to come forward with her allegation that Judge Brett Kavanaugh sexually assaulted her. So they're already setting up her like, well, she doesn't really want to do this, but she sort of has to. Whereas Tara Reid is being sort of set up as, well, she's making this allegation. So if you go down to the first line, you get very different sort of tones in the article. So with the Tara Reid story, it starts, Washington. A former Senate aide who last year accused Joseph R. Biden Jr. of inappropriate touching has made an allegation of sexual assault against the former vice president, the Democratic Party's presumptive presidential nominee this fall. Now, that's a very reporterly way of putting it. That's reporting the news, that particular statement. But look how Christine Blasey-Ford's article starts. The text message from Christine Blasey-Ford this summer worried her college best friend, Kathleen Porowski. Over the years of friendship as roommates, bridesmaids, and parents on opposite coasts, Dr. Blasey wanted to know, had she ever confided that she had been sexually assaulted in high school? So that's not very reporterly. That to me speaks of a, it sounds more like a movie of the week on a Lifetime channel pitch. Like, was this woman sexually assaulted? Can her life be pulled back together? I mean, like, it's already positioning and framing her story much differently. And they are different stories. They are very different stories. I totally acknowledge that. But the canyon between them is so huge. It's so huge. This one seems very clinical, and the Christine Blasey-Ford one is already putting her in this position like, well, she's in terrible danger and terrible trouble. Look at this poor woman, and it goes right into, now the first picture they show is her high school or the fancy prep school that people like Christine Blasey-Ford go to along with Brett Kavanaugh. But the picture here they show is Biden, and the caption is United States, Mr. Biden, then a United States Senator from Delaware during a Senate hearing in July of 1993. They're kind of already propping up Biden as, well, here's a very, important senator. And they also put a Republican in the foreground. I believe that's a Republican. I forget his name. It's not Mitch McConnell. Who the heck is that? I forget. And it's a pretty good picture of Biden. He looks very thoughtful and nice, and then you got this high school here. And keep in mind, we're also comparing, the actions of Brett Kavanaugh, who was in high school at the time when his incident allegedly occurred, and Joe Biden, who was a United States Senator who was 50 at the time. So there's a huge gap there. There is some leeway you can give to a teenager whether or not he committed some sort of overt act. There's not a whole lot of leeway you'd give a 50-year-old senator he's obviously responsible for his actions at this stage of his life. So, continuing, if this article was, one for one, the picture they would have put here would have been of how young both people were at that time. I think they later put a picture of Kavanaugh during that time. So we get to that part of the article, and the Tara Reid story says, last year, Mr. Biden, 77, acknowledged that the women's complaints about his conduct, saying his intentions were benign and promising they'd be more mindful and respectful of people's personal space, which, I would say he really hasn't done that. Like, he said that, and there was, I think, another incident where he, sniffed somebody's hair or whatever, and people got upset, and then I think he finally got the message. In response to Miss Reid's allegation, Kate Bedingfield, a deputy Biden campaign manager, said in a statement, Vice President Biden has dedicated his public life, blah, 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 blah. What is clear about this claim, it is untrue. This absolutely did not happen. So they're constantly telling you within the Reid article that it did not happen. Whereas in the Blasey article, Supporters of Dr. Blasey, 51, describe her as a precise, logical, scientific thinker, a community leader, a woman of integrity, a devoted mother of 2 boys. Her life's work is about telling the truth with science. So it's constantly building up Christine Blasey Ford. And, you know, the description of Kavanaugh is Judge Kavanaugh, a Republican, is a staunch Catholic conservative who lives in the nation's capital. Dr. Blasey's colleagues say is a Democrat from California who wore a pink brain hat when she joined fellow academics in protesting the Trump administration proposed cuts to scientific research funding. Their history coalesced in Dr. Blasey's telling in the early 80s in the insular money world of Washington private college preparatory schools. So it makes it sound kind of like she is, you know, not really able to stand up to this horrible world of money, you know, even though she's kind of part of it. Backers of Judge Kavanaugh, 53, in the previous paragraph, describe him as a precise, methodical legal thinker, a strong mentor, a pillar of the community where he and Dr. Blasey grew up. Yeah, so, and then they got a picture of her and a picture of Tara Reid. Now, of course, she's older. Dr. Blasey is in high school in that picture, which, you know, I don't even know why they need to put these pictures on, quite frankly, but that's what people want to see. The caption for Reid is, Miss Reid, 56, told the Times the assault happened in the spring of 1993. The other article is still going on and on about Dr. Blasey-Ford. She was self-possessed, recalled one of her friends who graduated in 1985, the year after Dr. Blasey. So they go on to describe the incident with Biden, and then they go through how Ms. Reid reported the incident to coworkers and didn't really go to the cops, even though her mother said. And then they keep talking to other people who just say, well, I don't remember any of this, who work for Biden, basically, or have worked for Biden. They go through in the other article, a long history of, you know, how these people grew up, Blasey-Ford and Kavanaugh, and how drinking was commonplace. And then they go into Kavanaugh's varsity thing, talking about drinking beer. They describe him as Keg City Club treasurer, 100 kegs or bust. Mark Judge, a classmate, a close friend, describes his own blackout drinking in those years in Wasted Tales of a Gen X Drunk. In his 1997 memoir about his experience as a teenage alcoholic, the book mentions a person named Bart O. Kavanaugh who had puked in someone's cars and passed out on his way back from a party. That may not even necessarily be him, but this is all part of the smear they're trying to set up in the article, that Kavanaugh is a bad guy. Obviously, he's drinking, he's partying, and look at this still. This is a video, but the still in the video, it looks, you know, you got Kavanaugh there. He looks very stern. As Judge Brett Kavanaugh faces an FBI investigation into the sexual assault allegations against him, his remarks about drinking have come under scrutiny. Here's what he said. And, you know, so it's all about digging into his past. The past that they're digging into in the Reid thing really is more of Reid's past. It's not really Biden's past. Really. You know, they're drilling down into details of Kavanaugh. They're not drilling down into the details of Biden, really. It's more about Reid and how, you know, when she told people about the assault. Oh, Joan, are you getting bored with this? You probably are. Sorry, baby. Sorry. You want me to put you down on the floor? I mean, here, you go play. You go play. I know, it's all very boring to Joan. And it gets into different recollections. And here's Kavanaugh as a kid, you know, from 1983. And really, it just keeps focusing more on how great Blasey-Ford is, how terrible Kavanaugh is, how great Biden is, and how, well, they even call her, Tara Reid naive at one point. And, oh, here it is, actually. Friends and former coworkers describe Miss Reid as friendly, caring, compassionate, and trustworthy, though perhaps a bit naive. A single mother, she changed her name for protection after leaving an abusive marriage in the late 1990s. I mean, this is all like the fodder they need to, sort of undermine her claim against Biden. Whereas on the other side, with Christine Blasey Ford, they did everything they could to build it up. So I think this is part of the unfair coverage in the New York Times, because they have a an agenda here. They're flacking for Biden in the one case, and in the other case they were going after Kavanaugh. So we'll just look at the final lines here in these articles. I don't want to read the whole thing. A resident of New Bern, North Carolina, which was devastated by Hurricane Florence, Ms. Pawlowski said she read the story when the power came back on her house, and she felt sickened by it. She said, "Seeing what people say, I really, really understand why somebody wouldn't want to be part of this discussion," she said. "I think it's brave, but it is a lot to take on." So it's like, Christine Blasey Ford is this brave person for coming forward after all these years. And how do they end the Miss Reid story? Well, Lucy Flores, a former Nevada State Assemblywoman who accused Mr. Biden of making her uncomfortable by kissing and touching her during 2014 campaign event, exchanged a few emails last year with Miss Reid, but said Miss Reid did not share her full story, which makes her sound like, well, she's adding to the story. And continues, "Biden is just not a hugger," Ms. Flores says. "Biden very clearly was invading women's spaces without their consent in a way that made them feel uncomfortable. Does he potentially have the capacity to go beyond that? That's the answer everyone is trying to get at." So there's a lot more doubt in that ending, right? Here it's like, and Christine Blasey Ford, it's like a given. She's fighting against the system, and she's so brave and wonderful. But then Miss Reid is, well, she might have gotten it wrong. Well, we're not sure what's going on here. There seems to be some conflicting information. There would be conflicting information on either one of these stories for it being so long. And let's be honest, no one here died. No one here, if anyone has a better case, Tara Reid didn't work in Washington again after this alleged incident. Christine Blasey Ford had a very storied career and went on to many things. So, if anybody's life has been ruined or close to ruin, it's more Reid's than Blasey Ford's. So, if you're going to base your news on that, if you're going to base your support on that, like who got the worst end of this. But really, this is supposed to be a news organization, and news organizations, especially in stories like this, have to be more objective than this, or they have to come out right and say, listen, we're in the bag for the Democrats, and here's what we think. Like, at least if they said that, at least if the New York Times presented themselves, look, we are a paper for the Democrats. We strictly endorse Democrats. We strictly endorse the left side of politics. Then I'd have personally no problem with it. They'd be more like Fox News, although Fox News doesn't really do that either. But, I mean, it's pretty obvious. And it's pretty obvious over at the New York Times whose side they on. But I think really all the news organizations at this point should really just come out and say, here's who we're for. This is who we're for. This is who we are. And then you can read these with a grain of salt. You wouldn't have people reading these articles and saying to themselves, well, the New York Times reported it. They're not really being objective. You can see by the presentation of these two articles, there is, in my view, a definite bias here. And if you just stuck to the facts, that would be great. That would be great. Obviously there'd always be a little bias, but back in the day, they at least tried to be objective. And I don't think the New York Times is trying anymore. And that is sad for what a paper that was at one point known as the Gray Lady, the paper of record. I think now they're the record of the Democrats. And, the wheel could turn and they could be bought by conservatives. And then where are you going to be, Democrats? So the credibility of the New York Times, I think, it's really at stake. And they've hurt themselves a lot over the preceding years, bending over backwards to help Democrats. And I think this is another example. They're not treating her the same way. And this is going to hurt, I think, people who have real claims. And, it's going to put doubt in their mind. And, when you suddenly discover the process of the judiciary, when Kavanaugh was being grilled, it was like, F due process. Now that it's Biden, it's like, well, we have to have an investigation. Let's slow down here. Let's follow procedure. And to me, that's pretty obvious. Well, it looks like Joan wants something, so I guess I'll end it here. And that's my hot take.